So funky title. It's actually the title of a mini review that I wrote. It's on archive now. So what is this about? Oh yeah, I always forget to thank people, so I put this stuff at the start. You know, a couple of funky pictures. So you know, it is. I say then I stop being cheesy. It's really a privilege to speak on the same podium as you know these people. You know. Yeah, I stole it from the internet. There are plenty of photos of Shihab on the internet.
Not thinking when they give you a PhD, they make you dress, rent this stuff.
Nice. Okay, so the beauty of this is that I can skip lots of the slides, but I just give you okay, what are we talking about? We're talking about speech, a bit of music at the end, I hope. And the talk is more about the going from the more traditional paradigms to more realistic speech. So the first transition, the first shift that we experienced is in the last 10, 15 years, I'd say. So I'm talking about natural speech from audiobooks, so these recordings that we study with EEG, for example. So this is the kind of stuff I use in Trinity. So you know, biosamin and brain training system, and now we got the OPN MEG. I'm very excited because you know, we don't have that much money, and finally we got an MEG system. So I have no excuses now. I kept saying, you know, Jonathan is so much better, and I was like, oh, it's because he has MEG now. I have no excuse. So this is the transition from, you know, syllables, words, sentences, and audiobooks. So we all know about this transition, right? So what we are starting to experience is a transition that goes from, you know, these audiobooks that they are realistic. They are a real task, all right? People say, oh, they're not realistic. They are a real task. People listen to audiobooks. They listen to the radio, right? It is a real task, but it's not the most socially relevant use of speech, right? So I'm talking about these two transitions, one from syllables to audiobooks and one from audiobooks to dialogue and interaction. There are so many complexities. And the point is that, is it even worth it? Should we bother? Because, you know, we introduce lots of factors like communication adaptation. You know, you talk to a child differently from the way you talk to an adult. Anxiety, trust, humor, all things that are experienced in a very different way in interactive communication scenarios. So I'm not talking about, you know, waffling about stuff that hasn't happened. It has happened. There are plenty of studies. So these are just a few references in the review on some of these types of scenarios that have been studied in this space. So I suppose the main thing is, what's the big research vision in these kind of transformations from being really controlled to being really realistic? What are we trying to do here? What's the point, right? It's cool. So I'm an engineer. I like this stuff. Technically speaking, it's interesting, right? You got two people talking to each other at the same time. Maybe they can see each other. They have two EEG systems. It's technically exciting. You have the microphones, and you need to transcribe and align. It's exciting. It is a real drive for, you know, for this kind of work. So the first goal is to check whether this kind of work is feasible at all, even before other things. But do we have too many factors when we talk about speech interaction? Could this really help us understanding brain functioning in any way? So there are these two transformations. So I organize the talk in these two transformations. And then if you ask me questions, too many questions, I'll skip stuff. That's okay. But I get to the social speech and interaction. So on the descriptive continuous, what have we learned so far? Have we learned anything? And we have learned a lot, I think. And I'm talking to a community that I'm sure that you think that we learned a lot. And different people in this room have worked on different aspects of brain mechanisms, from what is encoded in the brain. So we're talking about speech, what features are encoded in the brain, how are they encoded, neural entrainment, what frequencies, and that dimension. Then there is where in the brain, and finally decoding, which is always easier to say why that's important, right? But the other things, why do we care? Why do we care about how phonemes are encoded in the brain? You know, and that's a bit harder to explain to my parents. But decoding is easy to go on the, to explain to anyone. So this is the kind of stuff we do. I won't go through this, but the main assumption is always there is in EEG signals or MEG signals, the majority of the signal is noise. We saw about that. That might reflect very interesting things, but they're noise with respect to the processing of this particular input in this moment. But that's a different conversation that we just had. And there is going to be an encoding of different features. So we have these models that we saw many times. One thing that we haven't, that I wanted to mention is these models that map speech onto EEG. We have plenty of these models, plenty of data these days, and one of the issues is to standardize this kind of data. So one of the, I'm not trying to do some advertisement, a bit of advertisement, but so one thing that I found useful for my lab and for collaborations is to have every data set in the same format and have it in a way that basically the same analysis code can analyze different data sets. And that's great. We have a workshop and a hackathon on exactly on these kind of topics. And the advantage is that we can quickly do some very easy checks that can bring some important insights. So this is relatively new. So this is 7 data sets that are, most of them are publicly available. And we just combine them to see what happens. To answer a very easy question that I was asked a few times, people come to me because maybe they want to study speech processing on babies, or speech processing in children, and they ask me, how long should the experiment be? How long should each segment of the speech be? What's the difference? And the reality is that I was always answering based on my anecdotal experience on 5 data sets, right? They are all the same type of experiment. Well, now I took data sets from other teams as well, and we ended up with a good few data points. It's 13 conditions over all these data sets. And what we did was to take the TRF. And so this is like audiobook listening. So you get the chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. And in music as well, there's a music data set. There is a song number 1, song number 2, song number 3. And they're all like 2 minutes long. So we take the TRF in the first 10 seconds of each segment. And we see how well, if we fit the model on these first 10 seconds, how well it predicts the EEG. And then we take the second 10 seconds and then third 10 seconds. So within a block of 2 minutes is the start of that 2 minutes different from the end of that 2 minutes, right? So what happens? And, if you just look at one data set, it's hard because it's noisy. But here what we saw is if you look at the TRF components N1 and N2, if we take the first 2 windows, the first 20, 30 seconds, the TRF is very strong. And then it gets weaker and it kind of stabilizes after 30 seconds. So that's important because if I take now one data set and another data set that had different structure in terms of splitting the trials, one might be stronger than the other exactly for this reason. So it's a sort of adaptation. That's how I interpret it anyway. So it's nothing too exciting, but it is something we can do by combining this data set in. So you can download this kind of data and do it in half an hour. Very easy to run. So these are all the data points. So I use this method as well of extracting features and predicting the EEG, and that's what Ed described yesterday, so I won't go through that. So I'll just tell you one contribution that I think that we brought to this domain by using continuous stimuli. And I just ended up working on phonemes. I don't know why. My initial PhD project was on semantic processing, and then Ed told me, oh, there is this cool result from Nima. I didn't know who Nima was. Then he became my hero. And they're like, oh, we should try to do it with EEG. And that's how we started, right? So it was very, there was no super, we understood that it was important, but we didn't have a clear idea of the theoretical questions yet. But, Adi Chang in 2010 and others as well, they had great results on the categorical nature of phonemes. Right? The fact that if you take a phoneme like a ba and a ga, and you build an acoustic transition between the two, there are parts of your cortex that respond categorically to this category versus this category. So you see this L-shaped response. Other parts respond to the acoustic transition. So I was like, okay, we've proven categorical encoding of phonemes. but lots of people complain about this for multiple reasons. So one reason is doing this with discrete stimuli doesn't mean that in continuous speech we have categorical encoding of phonemes. It's not, it doesn't generalize necessarily. So what happened is there are also people that don't believe in phonemes at all. So I put a reference there, by the way. They don't believe in phonemes. I don't fully understand why. So Nima had this cool paper, and they showed on continuous speech this selectivity, that there were some channels with ECOG that were responding more particularly strongly to some phonemes or some features than others. So we thought, okay, let's do this with speech, and I talked about that yesterday. I just wanted to highlight this forward model on the right. This is a TRF where every row represents the response to a phoneme. Right? It's very colorful, and later on I'm going to show a transformation of this, because we can actually represent this in a space of distances that tell us in the EEG how similar two phonemes are, and that can be very useful. So that's I'm going to show data on in babies and second language listeners as well, second language learners. So after the study, and Ed didn't mention that there was a bit of a debate, and other people published pretty impactful papers saying that basically maybe we weren't measuring phonemes, that maybe it was just some other features. I think they're wrong. Christoph Daub is a very nice guy. I had lots of conversation with him in Glasgow. So I talked with Alan, and he was my little voice in my head for a few years, and he was saying, do you really want to go down that rabbit hole and prove this thing, And I didn't really want to do that. So lots of other people actually spent lots of time to validate this. So the encoding of phonemes in an acoustically invariant way during continuous speech processing. Some of them did it indirectly by doing their own research and contributed to this endeavor. And it's cool because, for example, Alessandra Federici, she got these phoneme TRFs in Italian now, with these children with cochlear implants. And then there is Lars Meyer from Germany, and he has a very cool study in children in Science Advances, and it was German and French, native and non-native speech. So they also started to include different controls from the time reverse speech that they were using. And of course, the Leuven group. There is this paper in Nature Communications from last year. I was really shocked to see this paper that was practically dedicated to replicate our current biology 2015 paper. It was really rewarding. And they have an ECOG data, and basically they claim that they validated that work. So I didn't do that. I didn't go down that rabbit hole. It's great. So instead, I started to apply these metrics of phonological encoding to different scenarios. Because if you want to prove that a metric represents what you think it represents, so in this case, it's phonological encoding, then let's correlate this metric with behavioral metrics of phonological awareness. Let's correlate, let's check if they are sensitive to learning of a language. Let's check if they are sensitive to deficits of phonological processing and so on. So I have a couple of studies I'll briefly mention. So one is on infant, the other is second language learning. I won't talk about dyslexia, but it's also a fairly decently cited paper now. So this is very exciting. It was published 2023. Publicly available data now. Usha Goswami in Cambridge collected this data. In this case, we use 50 babies, data from 50 babies, recorded 3 times, listening to nursery rhymes when they were 4, 7, and 11 months of age. So this is 50 data points per age. So it's very good. They were listening to nursery rhymes, which is, speech, but it's more rhythmic. It's more, Usha, she really likes the 2 hertz in terms of brain processing. And so this rhythmic speech is more towards that kind of 2 hertz syllabic processing. So simple thing, we fit an envelope TRF, right? It's actually not just envelope, there is envelope derivative, and there are other things. So I call this acoustic encoding. It's a forward TRF predicting the EEG of these babies. By the way, it's very difficult data to work with. It's very noisy. So I had to come up with another approach to make this stable. So I'm happy to talk about that as well if you want. But short story short, acoustic encoding is always there because they process sound.
So the corresponding R's would be 0.1 for adults.
This
is 2%. Would it be like 10% for adults? I mean, this
yeah,
is up.
In terms of prediction correlations.
Yeah.
I show you in a second, actually. There is a number on adults as well, because we had a control and adult control. It's a bit weird because then adults are listening to nursery rhymes, so they get bored. So it's hard to have a perfect control. Yeah. No, 3 times in one for each age. Yeah. So 3 sessions per participant. Yes. Same ones. Yes, same ones. So there is 100 subjects in total. This was the first set of 50. Very difficult data to acquire. Thank God I haven't done it myself. Now for phonemes, exactly as you would expect, right? So same thing that Ed was doing. It's the same model, right? I'm not doing anything, like beta coming up with a whole new method. It's basically for a 4-month-old. There is no response, no significance in terms of variance explained of these phonological categories. But from 7-month-old and 11-month-old is robust. And the trajectory is, sorry, I want to use my hands, but I can't go away. So the trajectory goes up, and you can see your data point there, Malcolm, for the adults. So the adults, it would keep going up, but as Jean-Remy has said as well, maybe then it won't go up as much anymore after, from 2 years of age and stuff. It will still change a bit, but you need to focus on particular contrast. Yeah.
For the accuracy of encoding or decoding phonemes in different categories through development?
Yeah, it's hard. It's very hard. We tried to look at different features. We have something in the paper. I honestly can't remember because it was fuzzy. Even with 50 subjects, it was really hard to get significant results. So I don't think we found anything particularly strong. There must have been some significance there, but I don't want to believe it until I see it again. But I mean, I don't think that this would be any different from, Patricia Kuhl's trajectory that she, I think it was 2011, she had this nice review with, we don't see anything that is particularly different from that, I think. I think what is cool is that it generalizes that onto a situation where this is not discrimination. They're not, you're not playing ba, ga, ba, ba, ga. It's not a discrimination task or anything like that. It's continuous speech. So these kind of answers, it attempts to answer those questions that people are having. Do we really need to do this for continuous speech? And, there are other questions in that dataset, of course, that I won't talk about. There are 5 papers or 6 papers on one dataset. We tried to predict from that data, the language outcome a year later, and it works. So it's cool. A similar trajectory, similar method with Nima and Jinping and Jeremy. Jeremy just graduated from Gregory Hickok's lab. He was a master's student with us in Shihab and Alan and I in Paris. Yeah.
So a line about clarifying logical encoding and post classification of NCR.
Clarify. I need to read this. Sorry, where is it?
It just says, please clarify phonological encoding equals classification of NCR.
In this case, it just means variance explained. It doesn't necessarily mean that we are classifying anything, but you could. So it is the distances between the different phonemes that matter. I show it actually in the next slide. So let me just lead to that. So this was a study with 74 participants that, again, thank God I haven't recorded myself. So I keep presenting data that I haven't recorded, apart from the old man in the sea that is on this t-shirt. I recorded just a few of those though, 8, and then the rest was Michael Broderick and Ed. 74 participants, 52 native Mandarin speakers with different proficiency levels, from beginner to advanced, just listening to stories in English. And so you remember the TRF from before, the colorful picture. So we project this on this multidimensional scaling space, a sort of PCA that Nima likes and I like as well now. it's just two-dimensional for you for visualization, but you can calculate this distance in whatever dimensionality space. So we have native speakers. The 22 native speakers are in blue, and you can see each element there represents a phoneme. And so this represents the distance in the TRF for every phoneme between each other. So vowels, they kind of cluster together on the left, consonant kind of cluster together on the right. You have nasals on the bottom. So that's one thing that we can do. So I used to wonder, how can we use these kind of maps? So we ended up taking a maps for native speakers and the maps for non-native speakers, calculated independently, and we morph one into each other. So we take the L2 and we transform it with this Procrustes analysis, it's called. It's a rotation. And we see how well they can fit one another. And when you get non-native speakers that are not good language, they don't fit very well. But when you get intermediate and then advanced speakers, they start fitting very well with each other. So the distance, that's the bar plot on the right, the distance becomes smaller. And so we got really excited, and I used this same metric on the babies. So on the left, you have the second language learners, and on the right, you have the babies that are learning the language. Yeah, you might say implicitly, but let's say they're learning the language as they get older. And of course, it would be great to keep going. And Lars Meyers actually did that with the different time frames. So we got children up to 6 or 7. Yeah.
On the right, you're comparing it to what?
To the adults. I'm taking the map for the babies and I'm transforming it onto the adult map. We actually have another one now. That's also why I'm showing this now. And we did this this weird thing. And so Giorgio, he's joining now the lab. He was in BCDL before. He's joining my team as a Marie Curie fellow. So he was in Spain, the Basque Country, and he recorded this data set in the Basque Country and in France, and sorry, and in Ireland. I was in Ireland at the time. And so he had a balanced situation with speakers that were native or non-native of the language. And so the idea is that there was speech that was native, produced as if you were talking to, who's a native English speaker here? To Ed, Irish English. So you were talking to Ed, and so you have native directed speech, but then you talk to me, and maybe you talk to me in a foreigner directed way. That's like how the granny in Ireland talks to me when they see that I speak funny. And how does that adaptation is called? Does it help encoding of, in this case, phonemes? So we've done it for all sorts of features, but I'm just talking about phonemes now. So it's the same metric. So when people that were non-native speakers were listening to foreigner-directed speech, then their encoding is more similar to what it should be for a native speaker. So it improves phonological encoding in that sense. So this condenses all of these maps onto a single number. As our colleague was asking before, can you look at different features, etc.? You can, but it's easier to summarize everything in one number, and that's how we did it. We also try to slow down the speech, but not foreign directed speech, just native directed speech, but slowed down. It doesn't do anything. So it's not a matter of speed. It's a matter of more clearly enunciating and having segmentation, etc. This was just acoustic accommodation. The words were the same. Of course, there is a lexical accommodation too. Yeah.
Explained by differences in the acoustics.
Mm-hmm. How much of that can be explained by different acoustics? So that's the beautiful thing. Actually, it's this slide. So these are the 4 scenarios I described before. On the bottom right is the one on accommodation. So in each of these, there was a control, right? So on the bottom right, the control was, we also had the native speakers. And so the native speakers, there was no difference in the phoneme encoding, phonological encoding, even though the acoustic was different. So none of that is explainable by the acoustics. In the other 3 instead, we had controls where we had acoustic models, as we saw for the babies, and there was no effect on the acoustics. So we can either control it computationally or with the control group, and I did a bit of both. So I'm concluding this part, and then I'm going to interaction. But just to say, I think we have helped by having these continuous speech paradigms. I think it's not just cool. I think it has actually brought some new insights. I presented my own little contribution, but of course there is much more. Interaction. Is it worth the effort? Should we bother? I'll tell you what I've been doing. And so this additional dimension. So what do we mean by interaction, first of all, experimentally? Because it could be that we are listening to podcasts. So we are not interacting, but they are, the two people that are having the dialogue. So it is an interaction, but in what we are hearing. So that would be the first level. Where is my mouse? This one. Then there is an interaction that is, like a lecture storytelling, where maybe it's in person, but the listener is not interacting that much, And then there is dialogue where we are actually interacting, and there are more levels, of course. So I present a series of challenges first. How is it?
20 minutes.
So I present a series of challenges. So first of all, we have many scenarios, like listening to a podcast versus, talking to a child, a job interview, talking with friends. So it's really hard. What do we want to study? That depends on your own personal questions. The other element is the number of factors that are involved when you study interaction. True interaction, like two people talking. Selective attention, that's one, of course. Familiarity, anxiety, trust, humor. So there are challenges that we haven't really talked about that much in this community. Of course, some have looked into it in various ways, but you can't ignore them anymore. And of course, there is speech production that I'm looking into and I'm not going to talk about today. So we start from this, where audiobook listening, so we know that, we have studied this transformation of sound acoustic into linguistic abstractions. And then we need to build on top of that, everything else. So, and the level of complexity on this axis goes from dyadic interaction to multi-party. So if I talk to a person or to a group, that's a different thing. Some people are very good in talking one-on-one, but they hate talking in groups, right? Some people are really dominant in groups. Ed is really dominant. Cocktail party, right? Different from the simpler sustained attention, but the fact that I'm talking with this group while this other group is there, I might want to explore. And so we have all these new factors that some of them were relevant before, but they become really central now. If you don't trust someone, or if you are super anxious, that really becomes dominant. So I start from the end. I'll show you a series of principal studies to get to this point, but I'll start from the end. So this is a classic AI generated image. My student gave it to me. So this is Amir Chale's work. Two people talking to each other in a hyperscanning setting. Two conditions. Listening to some topic. So this is speech about Hawaiian pizza, or about whether Formula One is a sport. Are they athletes or not? So there is speech that makes a point that talks about this, and then the two people have to have a debate about it. There are some controls, so we give predefined turns. So we say, you speak for 30 seconds, then you speak for 30 seconds. So we get rid of turn taking for simplifying things. And we put this visual barrier to simplify things as well. Otherwise, things are too hard. You can do it, but what do you want to prove? So we have 10 subjects so far. So five dyads, so it's not that much quite yet, but it's a bit. So I'm going to show the TRFs for the listening part. And just to give you an idea of the complexity. So first of all, recording this is harder. Dropout is more of a problem, etc. No, listening, the listening condition is easy. It's the usual audiobook listening sort of thing. You know, you have one speech stimulus, you get the features, and then you fit your TRF. You pre-process the stimulus only once. With the dialogue instead, you need to record the audio, transcribe it, align it. Are you going to do a manual check on every single participant? That wouldn't be scalable, right? So far we're doing all automatic to see whether this has any chance to work. Of course, it's a controlled environment. There is no noise, etc. So it's easier. So it's a bit of a stretched image because it's all new. So I stole it from my student. So we have passive listening on the left, dialogue on the right, and this is a forward TRF on envelope derivative, and word onset, I think. So the dialogue is a little bit higher. So exciting. No, because like, what are we trying to prove here? I'm not trying to prove anything. It's just to check that it's technically feasible, right? So let's not get excited about this stuff. But the TRFs look okay. You know, the envelope TRF looks reasonable. This is a portable system, an end-brain train, 24 channels. There is a new one now, 64 channels. They're better in theory. Anyway, there is a decent TRF. But we can't really say anything. I didn't have a great hypothesis here. It was a technical validation, really, and we're still looking into it. So let's take a more principled approach instead to try to understand what this increase might be, you know. So what do I mean by more principled approach? Let's take it step by step. So we took synthesized speech. So we took some text from a narrative. These are monologues. Sometimes the monologues are just the person talking to themselves. Then we take monologues where the person is talking to you, the listener. Like you're not there present, but it's still a pre-recorded thing, a synthesized speech, but it's talking to you as if it was a voice message. Italian people send lots of voice messages. I don't know if you do it as well. We are obsessed. My mom sends 10 minutes of voice messages. And the transcription doesn't work in Italian yet. It's in English. There is no transcription in Italian. So I think of it as voice message. Then we took ChatGPT sort of thing, and we said, oh, transform these monologues into dialogues. And now we have the text of the dialogue, and we synthesize that. So we have three conditions that are fairly similar in content. We avoided repetition and everything. And we see an increase. Now, this is better data. This is biosimic controlled, longer experiment, etc. So it's stronger EG prediction correlation. These are univariate models. This is an envelope tracking forward TRF.
Some kind of attention effect?
Probably attention. You know, they're talking to you and you're like, you know.
Right.
So it's something that we might want to study. Yeah.
Sorry to be annoying. I could you just add on to what she was saying? I wonder if you did the same controls, but specifically ask comprehension questions in the passive listening case, how it would change, because then you're forcing attention.
Yeah, we did that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they are the same.
Oh.
Because it's in clear, like there is no noise, it's easy. So they all do very well. I can't remember the number now.
Same as the dialogue.
Say it again, sorry.
So when you force attention in the passive speech case, do the TRFs end up more similar to the dialogue?
I actually have a result about that in a second, but they do. Well, no, it's not the no. It's not the attention. It's not the fact that you're trying to answer the question, but the dialogue that you see here is actually more similar to another experiment we run on podcast listening, real podcast listening. But it's not the attention, like the attention is good for all of them. But again, I'm not claiming anything conclusive here. It's just the first attempt, and I'm saying there might be something there. Let's go and figure it out together, because there are lots of questions here. But there is another thing, and I just wanted to throw it out there because I don't know.
Giovanni.
Yeah.
Quick clarification questions. One is you only take the listening part, right? The segments that they listen.
In this experiment, it's only listening. In the previous one, we only take listening. There was also production, yes.
So the production mixed with listening, that's your last data set.
This one was production as well, yes. But we ignored all the EEG when people were speaking. Like, it's not we ignored it, we are analyzing it in a separate analysis. Yeah.
Okay, and second question, topic-wise, then this, the condition, the next data set, content topic-wise, are they controlled?
They are the same.
Not exactly.
They're the same, and they're balanced across participants. So we have the version of the same story in the 3 different conditions, and then we swap them around for different participants, so that it's the most balance that you can get for this kind of stuff.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So I understand that the attention state is very hard to control. So have you checked any other like factors like gain in the sound or speaking rate or like to see factors?
Yeah, I mean, in this one, it's synthesized, so it's all controlled, it's all the same.
Oh, I mean, but was it consistent from the like just passive listening or the passive?
Oh,
Very little like that.
you mean for the other experiments? You mean?
I mean, like I wonder, like those factors are kind of consistent across these conditions.
Yes, but just to be clear, so this experiment, the previous experiment was interaction. This one, they are not interacting.
Oh yeah.
This is just synthesized speech, so it was all controlled. It's the most control you can get.
But then when the single person is listening to each of these conditions, if there are some like differences in those factors, that might be flattened each year.
What kind of differences?
Like in acoustic factors or stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, but the thing is that I'm just saying we need to look more into this. But because it's synthesized, and it was synthesized by an algorithm that doesn't know that this is a dialogue, we synthesize the chunks independently as if they were monologues. So the synthesizer, so it's all the same. The dialogue and the undirected speech, etc. Acoustically, there is no statistical difference between them.
But in that case, that might involve another problem that the synthesis is not really natural place.
Absolutely, and that is why. Let me get there. I'm showing you a sequence of experiments. So the next one, sorry, these are just topographies, just to show the topographies don't change; they just get stronger. There is another experiment we run. This was on podcasts, real recordings, right? We actually ran this a couple of years ago now. So again, Biosami, good data set, very good TRFs, envelope TRF on top, word onset TRF on the bottom, very nice looking, like the one from Michael Broderick, the dissimilarity TRF from 2018. So very nice, different lines or different electrodes. So what we did on this was to correlate these TRFs. I don't have that slide now, but we correlated this TRF with the TRF from the other experiment. And the dialogue one from the podcast correlates more with the dialogue one from the synthesized speech. That's all I have so far. So it's all new. So I agree there are lots of things to control, but these are more controlled than just the first one I showed. Let me just finish this this one. So because there is another problem. Right, I'm raising all the problems. Another problem, that when you have real speech, you have disfluencies. Right, I make lots of disfluencies. Right, yes, yeah. So different types of disfluencies. So fillers in this data set, there were 3 or 4% of the words, and repetitions and restarts were 1-2% of the words. They were not a problem in our data set, but I think that if you get real dialogue between people, we really need to control for how many disfluencies we have, because there is going to be a threshold, beyond which the language model will fail or will give you some funky results. So I can tell you that for real podcast, we use a Mistral 7B. This one is a version that was trained on conversational speech. So what we did was to take these models of surprisal, these models of, these transformers, and we extracted the surprisal, including the disfluent words. But the question was, does this change anything? Does this ruin our model because the surprisal is weird? And so what we did was basically to manually detect all the disfluencies, remove them, rerun Mistral, and basically nothing changed. Nothing changed, and this is the gain that we get with the disfluent and the non-disfluent surprise. And so it's not that with this level of disfluency, which is a professional sort of podcast, etc., not a problem. If you go to the previous scenario, so this one, we will need to go back. We have the transcript and everything. We need to go back and estimate the amount of disfluencies, because then you see you get a TRF that is weaker than the other. But what does it mean? Is it just because maybe one model doesn't work well because there are lots of disfluencies? We just want to make sure, to make this scalable, we need to understand whether we can do this automatically or not.
So there was a question online about, back to Elaine's point, how should we take correlation of 0.04?
0.04? Oh, it's great. Oh, you don't know what small effects are then. Whoever's asking the question. I mean, Ed was showing an effect of 0.002 yesterday. Look, it's statistical analysis. You need to have a good control, a good baseline, and you do statistical analysis on that. I'm not saying that this is strong. I'm saying that it's statistically reliable. But I'm going to show you something very strong now. Malcolm is going to get really excited about this. Attention switching, right? So because when you talk about real scenarios, the issue is that you might want to switch conversation because you're talking with, is there anyone boring here? No, don't want to point, no, can't point the sheet.
Just going, Jonathan, to tell him, watch, stop.
So you need a certain degree of exploration if you want to be able to switch in an environment, multi-talker environment. So here in this case, it's still controlled, but it's not the usual sustained attention experiment. It's not the first one, actually. There was a paper from Stephanie Harrow 2-3 years ago as well, but they didn't go as deep as we did. So it's just, classic speech bubble, 16 talker bubble, left and right speaker. And there is an arrow on the screen that says who you should be paying attention to. And then the arrow flips and you have to pay attention to the other person. So Nima has done this many times with the purpose of decoding, right? Now, I leave decoding to the experts and study encoding instead. So this is the forward TRF. Forward TRF for studying attention and decoding. It's crazy, right? The forward TRF on a 4-second sliding window. So I'm not joking, 4 seconds, good. Forward TRF. I can't remember the features. I think it was envelope derivative, and word onset. But it works whatever features you use. And basically you predict the EEG using the envelope of speaker 1 or using the envelope of speaker 2, and you see which one correlates the best. It's the opposite of the decoding approach. And then you check, the 0 is the moment of the switching, right?
This is with a cue.
With the cue, yes.
So how do you eliminate the cue over 4 seconds? I mean,
how do you eliminate the
talking
cue?
about the moment that the cue came on?
Can I show the result first? No, what's your question? No, what do you mean eliminate the cue?
They're all over the data.
Oh, we have that in, I don't have it in the slide. There is a P300 coming up. There is a P300 coming up, very strong actually. But this effect is much longer than the cue.
I know, that's why it's hard to remove the cue effect.
Mm-hmm.
Because
But it's the same for right and left, the cue effect. When you do decoding, it doesn't really matter because it's a
visual.
Yeah, it has the same luminance and everything. So it's just a P300 because you're like, oh, the cue. So it doesn't help you decoding. So what you can do is to try to decode based on the P300, and you can't decode that. I can go back to the animation. So it's the same thing that Nima showed many times, but our point is not to decode the fastest as possible, right? So we are actually looking at all the different windows in a different slide. Now, what we are seeing, and I'm excited about this one, is that there is a sort of an asymmetry between when you start engaging with the new speaker and when you start disengaging with the previous speaker. It doesn't happen at the same time. Now, when you subtract for doing attention decoding, you can't see this because you're just trying to decode who you're paying attention to. But if you look at the encoding, the green doesn't go down at the same time that the purple goes up, right? So it is actually, and this is significant stuff, but there are actually 3 bands that I'm identifying here. One where you start engaging with the new speaker, but you're still tracking the old speaker. That could be, again, a conjecture. like Alan was saying. It could be your opportunity for exploring, your ability of exploring. That might be for a fraction of a second. I'm listening to Nima for a second, and I go back to Shihab, or vice versa.
Kind of diminishing this with two speakers because what else is there to pay attention?
Yes.
You might have actually even give it more importance if there were more options and so on and so forth.
Yes, exactly. One thing at a time, though. Yeah, absolutely. Now we looked at alpha, which I don't usually look at. Yeah.
Thing that you're pointing out where it's flat for one and rising and falling for the other. Seems like that's a question you could ask whether temporal coherence models. Whether temporal coherence models have that same feature where, because the dynamics of temporal coherence, if you're switching, might have different dynamics for the attending versus the unattending.
Can you expand on that? What do you mean?
So if temporal coherence is usually applied to how selective attention can kick in and be sustained. I don't know if anyone has applied it to this switch. Maybe people have, but I imagine because there are dynamics, then you can have the final setting or the initial setting be different for the unintended intended. You could have in that model the same representation for one and a changing representation of the other until it's fully completed. This just might be a nice place to explore that.
Yeah. Can you explain it to me as I was 2 years old, no, 10 years old? What would that add to this?
It would add or subtract something from temporal coherence as an explanation for how the brain accomplishes this.
Okay. Cool. We will do that.
I'm not one of the authors. I'm sitting over there.
Yeah.
I'm just a fan.
Yeah. No, sounds good. Yeah.
If it reminds me a little bit, I'm speaking kind of against what I was saying yesterday about the notion of entrained oscillators, but it does remind me a bit of the idea of temporal coherence or something, that there might be a kind of and something Lucas has talked about in the past. You have tension or tracking or entrainment to a stimulus or whatever that can sustain and the offset of that, it might last longer than as another one even comes online because it's already entrained in some sense. And you can have almost a hysteresis where the
absolutely,
the thing that entrains can stay in training, whereas another one can start immediately. I'm not saying this extremely well, but I think I know.
No, I know what you mean. It might be that. Yeah, I'll look into it. I still think it's extremely hard to really understand. Really run more analysis on this because there are very few switches in the experiment. There are enough switches, but I don't know, 100 switches or something. So in the we have a new experiment with more. Yeah. No, yeah, I finished. I was just saying that we have a new experiment with more switches exactly because we have trouble. We don't have enough switches to get proper. Tell me.
So when you use such big windows for your TRF and all that stuff, you kind of miss.
I'll show you a slide in a second. We tried all sorts of windows, but we actually for the alpha analysis. So for the alpha analysis, we windowed it the same way that we did for the EEG, so that it will have the same temporal evolution, right? So this is windowed as well, the alpha. But we can look at different integration windows, of course, different how do you say, decoding windows. Correlation window. So anyway, the 3 bands, I mean, I just wanted to show what's going on. The peak here of the alpha, the negative peak of the alpha, the trough, basically is when we get to the plateau of the tracking of the new stream, right? So we we fully track the new stream now, and attention, you relax. Does that make sense?
I might recommend,
before
I forget, recommending later, is that you're doing alpha here, but you could do actually a bit broader, like you do a wavelet analysis of this over a bunch of bands and all that stuff. And I just really curious what the beta band would show.
Okay.
Because in motor systems, switching and all of that stuff, the beta band is a big sign of what's going on.
Okay.
And I don't know in cognitive switching.
Mhm.
There's no modem of anything here, but it's probably
Yeah.
the same substrate.
Yeah, and it's cool. I mean, I'm very happy. I got lots of comments on this. Also, Nima was talking about another thing that was more motor. So no, that's a good point.
As a mom.
Yeah.
If you have anything motor,
Yeah. But that's a, yeah, I know what you mean.
maybe there is. Maybe the eye is trying to move, but you're
Yeah.
not letting
I
it.
think it's driven by the spatial, like.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah.
Because,
Do I have it?
So we have some data that is similar, but with multiple speakers, and we do see. We didn't quite look at this trajectory of switching, but we see this idea of sampling when we have, say, 3 speakers.
Okay.
When they move in space, and I think something similar with the alpha that goes along the same lines. I don't know that necessarily motor, we're thinking about, some sort of role of the motor.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I mentioned the motor is because people have this kind of tasks and all that stuff, switching actions and what have you in motor. And
Yeah.
they know how to do a lot of analyses and all that. But the amazing part is that the same substrates are involved in cognitive attention, switching and so on.
Yeah.
And it makes sense because probably the same underlying
And I agree with that.
impulses to do
yeah.
stuff and all that. It's just
Yeah.
in one case you direct it to motor system, and the other case you direct it to something else.
No, I agree with that. You know that I like the motor hypothesis as well. Yeah.
So it looks like the alpha starts to go down more time lost to the suppression of the target than the increase of the background. Was that so your interpretation? Like the alpha is more related to suppressing the target than it is trying to pick up on this other speaker?
Yeah, I mean, based on also what Ed was saying earlier on and Jonathan, I mean, it could be that the persistence of the previous one is a sort of a more automatic thing that just happens, and so your effort and attention goes on the engagement of the new one, if that makes sense.
Or not play his suppression.
Yeah, exactly. Let me go very quickly.
Can we go to summary, because when you reminded me that we might have people leaving for flights.
Yes. So last result. It wouldn't be the last. I had plenty. I have some similar stuff on music as well with the attention. I should next time. The other thing that you can do on the same data set. This is the question, because we talk about this cortical tracking, but what about you're switching to this other person, and now the words you're hearing, it's are you predicting them? Are you predicting the next word for the new speaker that you're attending to, right? How are you predicting them? Are you predicting them based on, I don't know, you were getting the gist of the speaker before, or maybe you're predicting that. So these are different 4 different models I'm proposing. So here the orange square is where we are paying attention at the moment, and the red arrows are the context. So when we switch, do we just reset our context and just restart our building up our context? Or this is an oracle model, which is an impossible model, because this says that even when you were paying attention to the other speaker, you build context on the speaker you weren't attending to. So this is impossible. It's just an oracle. Or maybe you're predicting the next word on the new speaker based on what you heard from the wrong speaker. So what are you experiencing? So we built these 4 models with Mistral. I think it was Mistral here. And basically the reset in this particular scenario, the reset model works much better. Yes, works much better than the others. So the main point here is we are, even if these numbers are small, going back to the point that we discussed before, these numbers are really small effects, but because they're pair comparisons, we can see that maybe a model is better than another, and we can try to say something useful on how these predictions are built. Yeah.
I think this is somewhat unfair because this model has a longer history than, say, the acoustic model. Are you incorporating the acoustics from the past as well in this decoding? I don't think the TR model is set up for that, but I can tell you behaviorally. So I mean, I know we've done some studies that are very similar. And I know, for example, Barbara Cunningham has looked at this also, and you do have a build-up effect that is much more along the, the reset version, but as the scene keeps going, that people do better later than they do earlier when you have this. So if you take the orange and look at it earlier versus later, you see different behavioral effects. And so that suggests there is some kind of lingering acoustics that you captured from the top speaker that carries you or helps you. So and I don't know that this is a good way to do that, to tease that apart, because the envelope is just the instantaneous envelope. So you can't know that the past has helped you in any way.
If the past has, yeah, it will be fun. This is specific to entropy of speech. I don't see, like, because the topographies are so different from anything acoustic, I don't see how that would be a problem. But I'd love to talk about that separately. Yeah, so more realistic scenarios, I think, is exciting. I think we should do it, but we need to be really controlled and really careful. Thank you.
Good job.
One question, then we can take a break.
Is this experiment done in headphones or speakers around you?
The last one, that was spatialized. We had 6 speakers.
When we try to imagine how this is done in the real world, there's space and there's context that has nothing to do with what's being said. There's the fact that we're in this room. So as we go to another person, we don't expect that person to jump to another topic because we're within this context.
Yeah.
So, but every time I hear this, I only hear you people tracking the acoustics. That's only the audio. That's not the only information that's coming in. So when you say, how do you track the second speaker? You already have a lot of context for the second speaker, even though it's just starting. Because the second speaker is talking in the same, we're at the ballpark. We're all at the ballpark.
Absolutely. That will help your switch. Yeah.
Sunlight.
Yeah. It will help the switch, but lexically speaking, you're not understanding the words from the other speaker, because otherwise the comprehension task would be better on the, there were comprehension questions and they are able to answer the ones on the one they were attending and not the other. You know what I mean? Yeah.
That the decoding model does not take that into account. That's, I guess, is the, so when you do decoding based on instantaneous envelope.
We're not doing decoding.
Or encoding. When you look at the envelope, the contribution of the envelope, say, of the speech, you're only looking instantaneously. You did not capture the fact that there is acoustic information. I'm not talking about anything related with the lexical or sort of the semantics, but just acoustically, there is information that has been encoded in the brain, but you're not capturing that. You're just looking at the instantaneous acoustics as a contribution.
But how does that speak to the lexical surprisal?
No, it doesn't speak to the lexical. That's a different element, but I think it's not to tease apart the 4 models. You're focusing on the lexical contribution, but there is an acoustic contribution.
But there is an acoustic contribution. You're hearing.
Make them not as clearly separated as you make them look like in terms of how we process the present given the past.
Yeah, but look, we have 2 envelopes for the 2 streams, and we simply predict the EEG with the 2, and we see which one is most correlated. That's all we are doing.
Let's continue this offline.
Still too instantaneous. We're talking about a few seconds.
Yeah, it's probably the way the pictures don't get into that.
Because the advantage is specifically around 400 milliseconds around the central parietal electrodes.
Okay, let's continue this during the break.
Yeah.
Thank you, Giovanni.